thank you all for coming, and I welcome you all to today's session where we are going to give you certain tips and keys to actually start unlocking a success from startup. But before we actually start into this presentation, I want to give a quick introduction about myself. My name is Akanksha Pathak. I work as a senior cybersecurity consultant in Visa. I have worked for many big giants like EY, Boeing, Visa, and many more. And so far, the motive was to improve the security posture of the organizations, mainly based in US, and make them as successful as they can be in the cybersecurity world. That's what I've been trying to do, both professionally and personally. I have so far written 2 books on cybersecurity, and I have a podcast channel as well where I try to simplify security as much as I can, so that more and more people who feel that this world is extremely complex and daunting, it makes it easier for them, and it makes easier for them to actually adopt these practices. So that was about me, okay? Now let's know something about you. So before I start, I want to know who my audience here today is. I know a couple of faces because I see them at work, but other than that, I don't know most of you. So how many people here are from like developing background, developers, coders? Okay, great. And how many of you actually work in startups? Okay, good to know. All right. And how many are security engineers? I know a lot of you. Okay, all right. So for the people who actually work at startups, do you think security is at good enough posture for you to take it out to big giants at this point of time for your startups? Yes, pretty much.
Okay. We spend a lot of time and money on it, so yes.
I'm so glad to hear that. And when I do assessments, what I see mostly is there are a lot of pushbacks coming, and they say, hey, we put a lot of work in building our features or functionalities, and we want to make our product awesome, which I agree, but there's not as much focus on security. And that is what I want to change today. So all of you guys who are in developing background and security background and from startups, when you talk to people from other startups, please make sure that you propagate this message forward. And I have 2 motives today. When you get out of the room, you are absolutely clear. Why is security not just crucial, it's non-negotiable. You cannot do without it. And number 2, I want to give these very easy small steps of how can you start building towards security. Where do you start from? How do you actually guide somebody who's just building out? So with that, let's look quickly at the agenda for today. So first we'll start why security at all. We are then going to talk about the security lifecycle assessment, and I want to put a little bit light on this because I know that a lot of people build their security, but it's also important when you are ready to go and work with big giants, and when you're ready to sign the MSA, you don't want to be held back because of security. So you need to know what a security assessor is actually trying to look into your company. And then we'll talk about the meat of this presentation, that is how. So we're going to talk about few steps as to how you can start building a secure startup. And then I'll try to demonstrate a small example that will make this slightly more real for you guys. Not just theory, a little bit more of like how you can actually tactically do things. And we'll end with a conclusion and we'll open it up for questions. Having said that, I want this session to be extremely interactive and entertaining as possible. So if you have questions anytime during the presentation, please feel free to raise your hand or just ask questions. So we can talk, and if you have any questions, I can answer them, okay? Okay, we good? Okay. All right. So this is a nightmare that any startup can face. I'm sure some of you might have heard about Codespaces. This company was working great for 7 years, and they had no shortages of customers or clients whatsoever. And everything was going great. They were thriving until June 2014. Everything was gone in just moments of time. Basically, Code Spaces, they were a company that were providing some kind of code repository. So they would provide source code repository for their developers, and they would also provide project management services. And suddenly, they heard in a day in June 2014 that there's a ransomware attack that happened, and it started with the DDoS. They got a call from the ransomware attacker, and they said, hey, we need this much amount, or we'll start deleting your artifacts. In no time, they got to know that the attacker was actually able to get into the admin control panel. They thought, okay, we can change the password. They tried to do that, but by that time, there was so much that was leaked that the company couldn't even imagine. The attackers started deleting the artifacts, and in a very short time span, everything was deleted, and the cost that the company incurred because of this loss was way more than they could recover. Result was they went out of business. It was literally a brutal murder by cyber attackers. So you do not want to be in this position. You do not want any of your friends who have a startup in this position. So what do? You listen to me and you tell them to listen to you, okay? All right, so now let's talk about security assessment lifecycle. So you can see these 5 checkboxes that we need to hit. Identification till recovery phase. This is very important because you want to make sure you are doing all the right things that you're supposed to do, at least when you are starting out. The number one thing is identification, right? You cannot protect anything until you know you have to protect that. So you need to identify your assets, your systems, your data. You need to know what data are you dealing with, what is the volume of data that you're dealing with. You need to have a very clear architecture diagram, very clear network diagram. So you need to identify all these resources. Once that identification is done, that's the first thing that a security assessor will ask you. Hey, what is the data that you're dealing with? What is the volume? Can you show me your architecture? Can you show me your network diagram? Give me all the artifacts that you've laid down. That is the first step then any assessor will ask you. Once you have identified, the second step that they move on is assessment. Now, many of my friends over here, they are experts in it. So what they do is they look into everything that you've given them and they start finding or discovering the risk in that asset, in that architecture. So finding the risk is actually assessing what you've given them. Then comes the protection part. Once you have identified the risk that's out there, you move to protect it. How do you make sure that everything is protected, that your data at rest is protected, when it is transitioning, it is fine, nobody is actually intercepting and taking it out, nobody is attacking your system. So how do you make sure? That is the part of protection. And also you have to make sure that there are best practices out there, security best measures that you continuously implement to make sure that the system is well protected. And of course, moving to the monitoring part. Now this monitoring sometimes sounds as a very overloaded term. In very, very simplistic terms, monitoring means you want to make sure that any kind of alerts, any kind of anomalous behavior is triggered or is being targeted to the person who can actually take care of it and minimize the attack or the risk that's out there. That's the whole point of monitoring. Monitor it in the right way so the right person can take an action at the right time. Simple. And at the end, attacks happen every day. There are zero-day vulnerabilities that are coming out. Sometimes you cannot protect and you will be attacked. What do? You want to make sure that you can recover. Now in recovery, there are 2 things that mainly an assessor want to make sure you have. Number 1 is if you're attacked, you can, number 1, spin back your servers up and you can run your business as usual. And number 2 is you have the ability to mitigate it and again, run it, recover from it, and be able to learn from it. If you have these 2 things, they will be satisfied at least. So that is what a security assessor is actually looking into. There are 2 things that I want to highlight. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the next 2 things that I'm talking about, but I realized we had a lot of sessions on threat modeling. Since yesterday, we heard Tony about pasta. I was in Robert's session, he was talking about threat modeling in general. So I will not go deep into it because I'm assuming that you know a lot about it already. But threat modeling is something that every organization would do when you come and you want to work with them. There are a lot of different techniques out there. Stride, pasta, attack tree, dread, lot of techniques out there. But the main aim, just when threat modeling, the word threat modeling comes in, just remember, the aim is that you have some kind of system abstract. This system abstract would then be judged, and the assessor would try to find what are the goals or the methods of a potential attacker. Who is the attacker? What would be the goal? And then they'll create a catalog of threats. That is the main aim of threat modeling, right? They want to know what the threats are, and once you know that these could be the threats on your system, then they'll come up with recommended activities, the mitigation step. Okay, have you done this? Have you implemented so and so that this threat doesn't take place? So that's the whole aim of threat modeling. If you want to know more, I have this slide is available on LASCON, so you can go and download it. In the notes section, I've mentioned when to use which threat model. So if you want to know more about it or just have like a rough idea, you can definitely go and check it out. And the second thing, which is very close to my heart, is the supply chain risk. You know, every attacker would target the weakest link in your organization, and it's not something that's new. Since the very old target attack that I read when I was in school to now, which is Move It, that I've been dealing it in my organization, it has all happened because of third party, because of the weakest link in the organization. You have to make sure that whichever vendor, whichever client you're working with, you cannot make the client adhere to your security policies, but you definitely want your vendor to follow your security practices. But obviously, if you have one, so if you have one, do make sure that they follow those policies, those standards. You have that in the contract listed. You talk to them about it. You have a regular conversation about it. Try to take audit reports from them if they have one. That way you can pass on. So let's say you're working with a vendor and you want to work with a big company. You can say, all right, I'm working with this vendor, but I know that their security posture is really good, and here are the audit reports. So all of these things will help the company or your client have more confidence in not just your posture, but also your entire process of how you're dealing with your own vendors. So that is a brief about security assessment. Before I move to the next section, are there any questions so far? Yes.
You mentioned about vendors, what about open source projects?
Yes, absolutely. So with open source projects, there are a lot of other things, and I'm going to cover that actually. Okay. But you're right? When we use open source, and I actually do assessments of open source projects. When you use open source, there's not one entity that you're dealing with. You're dealing with a particular code or some functionality that you're trying to get into your organization. So what we do is we have like a lot of tools that we deploy for open source to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities, there are no libraries that you're using that is having any kind of vulnerable components. So there are many different ways that you can tackle with open source. You would not be able to deal with open source like how you deal with vendor. So you would do exactly how you would actually do if you are developing a code within your house, in-house. So that is how you would deal with open source, and that's how we do it. So then we're going to cover that a little later as well. Any other questions? Are we good? Are we convinced that this is what security assessor would ask? My team, any questions? Okay, all right. Okay, so moving on to building a secure startup. Now, building a secure startup is very important, but when you go to a startup company who is absolutely involved in building features and functionalities, you go to them, hey, do you have a good security posture? Like, yeah, maybe we do pen tests once a while, but they don't know, and it's not their fault, right? There's so much into how to make their product better that they sometimes, don't know enough about security. So I thought that maybe if we gave them at least steps from where they can start, they can actually build something which they can work on, just like how they work on their features and functionalities, and make it better progressively. All right. So one thing, we all know nothing can be 100% secure, right? You can't, we just know that. Everybody, all the organization know that fact. Nothing can be 100% secure. So what do? I'm not sure if you've ever heard about the term ALE. Have you? So ALE is annualized loss expectancy. And it's usually used in organization to do cost-benefit analysis. And in very simple terms, it means you save and you make sure that your critical data, critical resources are secure, and you accept the risk that if your not so critical data is exposed, you are ready to take the risk of that. Example, very simple example. Let's say you are dealing with any any personal data or government IDs, you are capturing some government IDs, or if you're dealing with healthcare data. You absolutely want, I have a friend and she's into healthcare, right? She absolutely knows that healthcare data is so crucial, not just from corporate perspective, but from a personal perspective, right? And she was telling me about that hey, I talk to people from a personal level, not from technology level. So we know that this data is so crucial to save. So you make sure that these kind of data is protected well, versus there might be some of your marketing materials that that would be public at some point of time. You definitely don't want to disclose them right away, but it's okay, and you take that risk that if some of my marketing materials go out in the wild, I am fine with it, and the business accepts that risk. They, again, depend on who you are, and that's not absolutely a secret recipe in the marketing material that's out there, but that is what risk management basically means. You protect something that's absolutely crucial, and you accept the risk, which is not, that you're okay losing with, or you're okay bearing the compensation. So you remember one thing, we definitely do not want the cost of implementing a security measure or remediating a vulnerability. We do not want the cost to exceed at any time with the resource or the information at hand. The day that happens, if the cost becomes more, it means either you're out of business if you cannot afford that, or it means you're ready to accept to lose it. So that's why we take a risk-based approach. And now from where we start, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. Obviously, there are a lot of frameworks out there. I've given an example here that's from security agency, but I've given an example here of NIST. You can use these guidelines that are already available from NIST. These are like Excel formats. You take them, download them, look at the controls one by one, and see what is applicable to your infrastructure, to your application. Whatever control is applicable, you take them, you build policies and procedures around it, and then you talk to the security team. Now, your security team is going in the right direction, that is aligning to your need and to your budget. So that is what risk-based approach means, and that is how you start. Now, once you know what your framework is, you move, yes?
That's part of what you're addressing is like that urgency of having that at a startup level.
Yes.
There's no security team.
Absolutely. Okay,
right?
that is...
So what happens in that scenario when there's no security team? And what I've seen is that companies that are conscientious about
Yes.
they want to do the right thing, they get the framework, whether it's NIST, CSF, or something else, or they get a questionnaire from a prospective customer from their risk of third-party product, and they're like, all of that turns into a to-do list, even though half of it's
That's
nonsense.
so true.
Right, and that's
Yes.
and that's the challenge. That's the wasting time effort that they have.
That is so true. And what he said is actually very, very practical, because that is what happens. You don't have a security team, but that's what I said, right? In the very beginning. That's what I want to emphasize. Security, that is what startups have to understand. Security is very crucial. This non-negotiable. So while I understand that they might not have a security team, at least start with one security team. A team that is considering of one person. Start with one person. With that one person who has some experience in security before, talk to them and come up with a framework that most suit your needs. At least we can do that, right? And from there, they can start building on the policies and procedures. So again, yes?
I was just going to feedback, because an 8-year-old startup, and I'm the CTO, and I'm still doing that.
Okay.
Right? So it's still it's still a one-person team, 30-person company.
And it works, right?
It does work. It's hard work.
It's hard work, right? But if you have one person, I think you have to club it with somebody's intelligence and with a lot of tools. So you either have tools in your company that one person can try to manage, or you have a lot of people and you can do away with a little number of tools. So I think that's a balance. Yes.
I think on that front, like it's a stage whether it's a small company or whether further on, it's also a good place to consider finding the right partner where you can get like a fractional CISO or a security advisor where you can't afford that full-time person that's experienced enough in the space that you're in, especially if it's a very technical space. You're not going to afford that talent up front. So finding someone that can give you 5-10 hours a month even, just to point you in the right direction to do stuff can be really valuable and beneficial to accelerate those outcomes.
Very well said. And I think I was doing that before. So when I was at EY, that is when we were hired. So consultants were hired for a small time period, make our security posture look good, and then their team could run from there. So absolutely, very well said, right? So you can hire people who can do it for dedicated time and dedicated resources are there, and then you can work as it is said. That's great. All right. Any other comments? No, these are all great comments, and I absolutely agree. This is what makes it more practical when you see from the real world that this is what is happening. How do we deal with it, and what do we do? All right. So now that we've understood taking a risk-based approach, what do we do next? As I said, you would not be able to protect something unless you actually know that exists, right? You go to a doctor, they won't give you a medication until they've done the diagnosis, right? Or if you are a cook, you would not be able to make some nice dish until you have the right ingredients. In a similar way, you will not be able to protect something that you do not know exists. And that is the reason we need to have, and it's absolutely important to have an asset inventory. So imagine, right? You're a company that started with 10 people, okay? At that time, you did not have any asset inventory. That's fine. Now the company grows from 10 to 50 to 100 to thousands, and now it is this asset inventory that becomes unmanageable. You do not know what corporate assets you have in your company. You do not know what software at what versions are there in the company. Have they gone through the latest updates? Have they been patched lately? You do not know about that. You don't even know who is managing it. And that's the whole point of an asset inventory. And there are so many tools available out there that you can use to manage your asset inventory. But if you're tight on budget, don't worry. You don't have to use those expensive CMDB tools. Take Excel and start building your asset inventory from there. And I'll show you how. And if you don't have Excel, you say that I don't work with Microsoft Suite, that's fine. Please go take Google Sheets and start working with it. It's free. Please go ahead and do it. If you know somebody's not using an asset inventory, it's a must have. And again, when I say asset inventory, it needs to have both the things, both hardware assets and software assets. Information that it needs to have is what is the asset itself, what is the model, what are the license number, what are the versioning. And again, I'll show you in the demonstration, maybe that'll make it a little bit more clearer. But you absolutely need to have that along with who is maintaining it, who is owning it, and who is managing it. Okay. Any questions on asset inventory? Okay. All right. Now this part, communication and network security. This is very, very important. But I feel that a lot of companies already have it. The problem is that the network security protocols that they have sometimes are not perfect, or the network diagrams that they provide us are absolutely not accurate. And that's the problem. We have to make sure that you have a complete knowledge of how your network looks like. Okay, so let's take an example, right? I was working with a company and I was like, hey, tell me about your network security. How do you do it? So the first remark was, hey, we use a very popular cloud provider, so we are secure. I was like, no, please do not say that. You are only secure from certain perspective, and using like great cloud providers is a very good example, and I myself advocate that because companies who are starting out, they're low on budget, they want to make sure that everything is covered and you do not overdo the cost. But from security perspective, you do not have to worry, okay, that they will patch your servers. That would be done, but still managing and configuring is still your responsibility, especially when most of the companies use cloud as like IaaS provider, right? Infrastructure as service. That's what most of them use. The configuring and the managing part is still your responsibility. You have to make sure how the firewall rules look like, right? You have to make sure how will the incoming and outgoing traffic look like. That's something that we call ingress egress traffic, right? What is allowed, what's not allowed? What are the access management rules? You want to make sure that these rules are set, and these rules are set right. That's the key. So again, as my friend pointed out, right? If you do not know how to start with it, either look into a lot of guides that are out there, or hire experts, like hire consultants who can help you at least build or establish that initial section of it. So that's about communication and network security. One thing again I want to emphasize, please make sure that you have a network diagram and that it is updated at all point of time. That is really important because that will let you know how your network looks like and what are the places where an attack can actually happen. Now for startups, this is where your secret recipe lies, right? Your code, your functionality. Now imagine if somebody just comes your code, steal your secret recipe, or do something really wrong in your code and put out a message that's not something that you intended. You don't want to do that, right? This is a very important piece, and it is slightly more technical and tricky. But you have so many great tools out there available. And again, for all the tools as well, like both open source tools and the other popular tools I've listed in the notes section of this. So if you want, please go ahead, download this and use it. But you have so many tools available out there. So imagine that your coder is writing a code and the tool prompts them, hey, there is a security vulnerability, please go ahead, fix it. This is wonderful, right? You don't have to worry about it. And that's why there are so many tools out there that you can use and that's there for your disposal. If you don't want to use tools, the other option is that you work with security experts, hire somebody for a short period of time, work with those security experts, and what will they do? They'll start reviewing your code, your source code. They'll review the source code initially, and then they'll basically help you establish like a secure development lifecycle that you can basically train your developers in, and then they can run it from there. But we definitely need to make sure either there is a security personnel who is helping you with that, or your security team is aware of the best practices, or security team aware of the best practices, club with some good resource. You can use open source tools out there as well, which is pretty in your budget and they work really well. Any questions? Okay. Now security operations. All right, I was talking to somebody and they commented on this saying, hey, you know what, I really love my army because of them, I am sitting in my home and sleeping peacefully. I said, you know what, I think executives should thank their security operations team for the same thing. Security operations center is basically, you can have a team, or again, you can have external parties doing that for you, but security operations team are there so that they can monitor any kind of alerts that are coming in and take the right action to mitigate that risk. But also, they work really hard to make sure that you don't get a call at 2 a.m. in the morning and you are at the verge, hey, please remediate it right now, or we are under attack. So they're really the main reason why we are, being peaceful at night and everything is going great. So I would say that monitoring is an important piece, especially when so many zero-day vulnerabilities are out. I get calls every Friday. Every Friday, it's Akanksha, there is something off, and then we have to work on it. And you cannot avoid it, especially given in today's days when when the attacks are becoming more and more sophisticated. So it's very important that you get alerts. One thing that I want to mention in the alerting part, many people say, hey, we use Splunk. We log all the activities. You don't have to log everything. You have to log the right things. And you have to make sure that alerts are generated when there are anomalous behaviors. And it is triggered to the right person who can actually take action. If you log everything, number one, it'll be very difficult for you to archive everything. And number two, if you log everything, it'll be very difficult for you to actually find what is actually an anomalous behavior, what is it that I have to action on. And you can also have like a playbook for your security team or whoever is managing it. And again, playbook guides are also available out there. I think I looked at a lot of federal agency playbook incident guides that I think I've referred later. But you can use those guides and build your security incident response or vulnerability response playbook from there. And last, now that you have all your security controls established, great. How do you know they're working? You can only know that if you test it. If somebody can break it, then they're not well. So you have to make sure that there are both internal scanning and external scanning. You have to make sure that your production systems are scanned. You have to make sure when somebody is coding, there are no source code vulnerabilities that actually move to production, right? And you want to make sure that runtime vulnerabilities are not there. So you have to make sure that there are some kind of testing that's continuously happening. And sometimes you don't want to do that all the time. So you can hire pen testers, especially when you want to scan anything that is internet facing. So like if I have an internet facing URL, I want to definitely make sure that there's a pen tester who has tested it, and if there are any kind of vulnerabilities, they are all addressed. Also, one good way, especially when you want to go and work with big giants, try to have a SOC audit, SOC certification with you. And a SOC certification takes any time between like 5 weeks to 3 months. And trust me, when you're ready to sign an MSA, nobody wants to wait for months. So if you can, try to go ahead and get SOC audit. Once I have seen a lot of times when any company present their SOC 2 Type 2 report, there's a lot of confidence that we get, okay, the security posture has been tested once. So it is at least decent, if not the best. So this really adds a lot of value, especially if you are somebody who wants to, work with big companies in the future. And that wraps up the second part. Any questions? Anything? Okay, now let's make this a little bit more real. And again, a disclaimer, this is like a real easy, simple example, and you can think of it like your first hello world program in a Java code. I'm assuming, yeah, the developers here can relate, right? A very simple example, but I want to show how does it look like. I thought it would be bigger. All right, so let's see if I can zoom it a little. No, I can't. Okay, never mind. Okay, so let's take an example of a company who wants to create this mobile banking application. And what this application does is it takes data from customers through WhatsApp, like know your customers, the KYC information. They take this information from the customers and will feed this information to the to the main banking portal. That is the application. That is the application that your company has created. All right. Now, I want to know as a startup, where do I start if I have this business case? Okay, so I went through and I looked into a couple of frameworks, and I realized that I would be working with banks, and banks in future might be working with some kind of federal agencies. Federal agencies usually want to adhere with NIST guidelines. So all right, I think I can start with a NIST CSF. So NIST Cybersecurity Framework. All right, there was an Excel, I downloaded it. I start looking into it. What is applicable for me? I will be handling customers' personal information, all right? So I need to have data security. What else will I be doing? I will be working with WhatsApp. So I need to have supply chain risk. What else? I might have to, go and give some kind of audit reports, some kind of reporting. What do? Risk management. I need to have some kind of accesses out there, right? I'll have admin access for my application, all right. So I need to do access management. And these are just examples, right? So you go through the controls one by one and you see what is most applicable to you. So you picked up those controls, double click, you'll see again a lot of policies and procedures that this is what you should do to implement these controls. Now you have the controls in place. Great. Point number 2. As I said, you will not be able to protect anything unless you know that exists. So what we do? Start with Excel. Start with any free tool that you have or any tool that's at your disposal. Start with that. Here I've taken a very simple example in an Excel sheet. I have people who are working in my company. I listed out their corporate laptops. I've mentioned the ID, mentioned the model, version, who's the responsible party, and what's the management criteria. What would be there? Okay, the computer would be restricted. Only admins can make a change at so and so time. I've listed that in the asset. I know I will be using tablets. I might use some mobile phones for testing my application, right? So I've listed all of that down in my asset inventory. I also know that I would be, for my software, I would be using some kind of framework, some kind of libraries. I would also be using version control systems. So all of the software I've listed down here with an ID, with model, version, and again, who would be responsible for patching, what will happen after a certain point of time. I've listed that in the asset inventory. This is a very simple asset inventory, but trust me, if you have it and if something happens, it becomes very easy for you to actually identify what you have to do. So like in case of vulnerabilities, especially zero-day vulnerabilities that are out there, what do they say? Hey, patch it to so-and-so version. You open your asset inventory, you know, okay, my system is at this particular version. I need to update it. And as soon as you update it, you also have to make sure that your asset inventory is updated. When there's a new employee coming in your organization and you're handing them a new laptop, please make sure that this asset inventory is updated at that point of time. That's the whole point, to identify what you have and to make sure you know what you have, okay? This, and one more thing I forgot about it. So data classification. Now this I've seen many times. People say, yeah, okay, I have restricted data, I have confidential data, but have you classified your data? Do you know what data is restricted? Theoretically, yes, but do you know it? And that's when it's suggested that you use some kind of tag. So if there's a table where you're using customers' data, customers' PII data, please have a tag that says, okay, this is a sensitive data. Or if you're using marketing material, okay, this is not public, but this is still a restricted data for me. Have some kind of tags or labeling, so when you want to know what is restricted versus what is not, you have that with you, and you can put security controls around them accordingly. Again, risk-based approach. All right, and then it takes me back to my architecture and network diagram. So I tried to create some network diagram and architecture diagram, very high level for this particular application. It's not visible, but never mind. What I want to emphasize here is, when you make an architecture diagram, don't just restrict it to what you have in your corporate environment. If they're interacting with an external party, or if they are hosted on cloud, make sure all those links are listed out there and how they're interacting, where they're going. All of that needs to be listed. So in my case, if let's say I've hosted my data on AWS, I need to make sure those connections are here. And if they're talking to WhatsApp, what information is going to WhatsApp, what information is coming, and how it is happening. So I want to make sure that entire information is captured. Sometimes, you cannot have one big architecture diagram, and companies have multiple architecture diagrams at different levels, and that is absolutely fine. As long as you know you have everything captured, you are good, you're covered, okay? And now, something that I said before, right? It is very important that you make sure that you have either tools or you have some personnel to help you secure your code. So here again, it's not visible, but basically what I've tried to show is that during code build, there is a SaaS application out there. So they've used SonarQube, And using that, the developers would know during their build time, okay, there's a vulnerability, we need to fix it. Once from development system to testing system, when the code is moving, they would check through a DAS tool. Here I've given an example of OWASP ZAP. They can use that particular tool and okay, they can find out runtime vulnerabilities. Runtime vulnerabilities can be like an API endpoint security, right? Those are like runtime. And for source code example can be like a hard-coded, if you've hard-coded any kind of encryption keys, those things would come out. This simple examples, but this is what you would know. Once the code moves into production, there are continuous scanning happening. You can use a lot of different things to do it. You can use tools like Wallace that do vulnerability scans on your system. What it means is, if there are any vulnerabilities that happened when the code's moved in and you do not know about it, nothing could catch it, the vulnerability the scanning that's happening in the production environment, that is when you'll catch those vulnerabilities and you can actually figure that out and you can patch it accordingly. And OSS, so I had a question about open source, right? You had a lot of tools. So here I've used SCA, software composition analysis. We're saying that using these tools, you can find what kind of outdated library. So in my mobile banking app, if I'm using a library that already has a vulnerability, something that is outdated, my tool will catch and say, okay, this is not the right library, use something else, or use this particular version of it. So that is how you put security in your DevOps. So that's what we usually call DevSecOps. That's what Robert in the other room he was explaining. Try to have security inbuilt with your code as you go along. So if you work right now, you have to put in less effort in trying to actually mitigate it. Also, you do regular code reviews. There's threat modeling, obviously. So that's a part before when you're actually doing the design part. That's when threat modeling comes in. When you're actually coding on a day-to-day basis and there's not new functionality, there's like minor changes, then this comes into play. And this solves a lot of your problems. So if you don't have a lot of things, but you say, hey, this is my SSDLC report and I have remediated all my vulnerabilities, trust me, the assessor will have enough confidence in you because they know that they're going to use your code and this is all has been scanned, it is free of vulnerabilities, we are good. Okay. And so again, I don't want to go into this again in much detail, but this was an example that I took from federal agencies. There was an incident response playbook, the link is here. But you can just download these. A lot of things that were out there, I think, can be made applicable to your organization as well. So just use the things that are already out there. And internal and external testing. So in this case, I imagine that the startup decided that they would hire a pen tester, and the pen tester used Burp Suite code. They found, okay, for the internet-facing URL, they did a pen test. They said these are the vulnerabilities, gave it back to the organization. They did a remediation part, retested it, prepared an executive summary, and presented it to their client. So that's the whole journey. And then because they had all the controls, they also went for a SOC 2 Type 2 certification, and they presented it to the big organization, and everything went great. Everybody lived happily ever after, and I wish that's the story all the time. So again, before we move to the conclusion, any questions so far? Okay. Are you convinced that security is important and crucial? Okay, so then I think I've done my part here. So it's very important, number one, that you understand what is it that the security assessor is looking for, and you make sure that those controls are in the place. Start with very minor steps, and just like how you build your features and functionalities every day, just make sure that you work with security in the same way. And you know, after some time, progressively, you'll see that your security is great and your company is doing great. So yeah, I think that's all for today. If you have any other questions, please feel free to talk to me, and if you want to find me, I am here. All right, that's it. Thank you.